Rolex is one of the most famous luxury watch brands in the world. Today, it's a multi-billion-dollar symbol of status and success. But this story doesn't begin with yachts or gold displays. It begins with a teenage orphan in Kulmbach, a small German town, his inheritance locked away, his future handed to strangers. With nothing but discipline and stubbornness, he crossed borders, started again in a foreign land, and turned a quiet obsession with watches into the name we now know as Rolex. Hans was born in 1881 in a small town in Germany. His parents ran a modest business. Nothing glamorous, but there was warmth, routine, a sense of home. Then, suddenly, both of his parents died while he was still a child. In a moment, his world went from normal to nowhere to belong. Hans and his brothers were sent to live with relatives. The family business was sold. The money was put into a trust to pay for the children's education. On paper, that sounds safe. In reality, it meant one thing. You're on your own now. We'll pay for school. The rest is up to you. Hans was sent away to boarding schools and training programs. He grew up far from any real feeling of home, surrounded by strangers, learning to rely on his own discipline instead of anyone else's comfort. Maybe that's where his relationship with time began. When you're alone, time feels sharper. You notice every hour. You start to ask, what am I doing with my days? What am I building that no one can take away? Hans didn't have parents. He didn't have a family business to inherit. So he decided to build something else. Skills no one could repossess. In his late teens, Hans left Germany and went to Switzerland, the heart of watchmaking. He found work as a clerk in a watch export company. It sounded like a simple office job, writing letters, filling orders, checking shipments. But from his small desk, Hans had a front row seat to something big. Boxes of precision watch movements arriving from workshops all across Switzerland. Orders going out to London, Paris, New York. He started to see how this business really worked. Tiny gears and springs becoming instruments of trust. A few millimeters of metal deciding whether a sailor, a soldier, a businessman arrived on time, or too late. Hans became obsessed. He studied not just the watches, but the market. Which brands people trusted, which names were on the certificates, which countries demanded the strictest accuracy. At that time, the king of watches was the pocket watch. Large, heavy, carried in the waistcoat. Wristwatches existed, but people laughed at them. They were seen as delicate jewelry, suitable maybe for women, but definitely not for serious men. Too small to be accurate, too fragile for real life. Nobody will trust those things. Most people accepted that. Hans didn't. From his desk, handling orders and complaints, he saw a possibility. What if you could put pocket watch precision on the wrist? Not as jewelry, as a serious instrument. It was a crazy idea at the time, but to an orphan with nothing to lose, crazy ideas were just ideas no one else had the courage to try. In his early 20s, Hans moved to London, the beating heart of world trade. In 1905, he started his own company with his brother-in-law. They called it Wilsdorf and Davis. The business plan was simple, almost boring. Import high-quality Swiss movements, put them into elegant cases in England, sell them under their own name. But Hans's real agenda was different. He didn't just want to sell watches. He wanted to prove that wristwatches could be as accurate as pocket watches. He began ordering the smallest, most precise movements he could find. He pushed suppliers to improve. He demanded accuracy certificates, the kind usually given only to serious navigation instruments. People thought he was wasting his time. Customers would come in, pick up a wristwatch and say things like, "Looks nice, but can you really trust this little thing?" Hans was stubborn. He believed that if he could combine elegant design, true precision, and a strong name, he could change what the world believed. There was just one problem. Wilsdorf and Davis was not a strong name. It was long, hard to pronounce, unforgettable in the wrong way. Hans wanted something short, sharp, easy to say in any language. A word that could sit comfortably on the dial of a watch. According to his own story, he spent days playing with letters and sounds, whispering names to himself as he rode London's buses. Until one day, a simple 5-letter word came into his mind: Rolex. It didn't mean anything, yet. But it sounded clean, precise, almost like the click of a mechanism. He decided, this is the name I will turn into a symbol of trust. A name is nothing if the product behind it breaks. Hans knew this, so he attacked the problem from 2 sides: accuracy and survival. First, accuracy. He submitted Rolex wristwatches for the same rigorous tests used for marine chronometers, the instruments ships use for navigation. Slowly, Rolex watches began collecting official certificates of precision. It was unheard of for wristwatches. Then came the second battle, the battle against water and dust. At that time, watches hated real life. Rain, sweat, dust from factories and soil, all could slip inside a case and ruin a movement. Hans wanted a watch you could keep on your wrist in everyday life. In 1926, Rolex introduced something new, a watch case that screwed down tight on the front and back, with a crown that sealed like a lid. He called it the Oyster, a watch as tightly closed as a shell under the sea. A bold claim. But Hans understood something about human psychology. People don't believe words, they believe stories. So he looked for a story. In 1927, a young swimmer named Mercedes Gleitz attempted to cross the English Channel. Hans saw his chance. He gave her a Rolex Oyster to wear on a chain around her neck while she swam in the freezing sea. Hours in cold salt water, waves, spray, everything a watch should hate. When she came out of the water, the watch was still running. Hans took out newspaper ads showing Mercedes and the Oyster. He turned a technical feature into a legend. This is not just a watch. This is a watch that survives your life. And people listened. Hans didn't stop. He knew that even if a watch survived water and dust, one thing still annoyed people: winding. Forget to wind your watch and it would simply stop, silently punishing you for not paying attention. So Rolex focused on a new goal, a watch that wound itself as long as you kept moving. In the 1930s, Rolex introduced the perpetual mechanism, a rotor inside the watch that swung with the motion of your wrist, winding the mainspring automatically. Walk, work, live your life, and your watch stays alive with you. Again, it wasn't just engineering, it was a message. If you keep going, your time will keep going with you. Rolex started to appear on the wrists of explorers, divers, pilots, climbers. Each expedition, each achievement became another piece in the story. Not just this is an expensive watch, but this is the watch of people who push their limits and come back to tell the tale. Hans Wilsdorf faced wars, economic crises, and even suspicion because of his German origin in Britain. He had to move headquarters, rebuild parts of his business, and adapt to a changing world. But one thing never changed: his obsession with making Rolex synonymous with reliability. He never had children of his own. Instead, he did something unusual. He placed his company into a foundation so that Rolex's profits could be used for charity, education, and cultural projects. The Orphan built a brand and then made sure it would outlive him and serve others. So what does this story have to do with you? Hans didn't start with privilege. He started as an orphan, a low-paid clerk, and a man most people doubted. Rolex wasn't born from a perfect beginning. It was built from a broken one. The real lesson isn't, one day you can buy an expensive watch. It's this: your starting point does not have the final word on your story. Hans answered that question with 5 letters: Rolex. The answer you choose is still unwritten.